Hey guys, tonight we wander into the shimmering deserts of ancient Persia, where survival wasn't just about finding water, it was about defying the sun itself. You're standing on a dune at noon, heat rising in visible waves off the sand, your sandals sinking into grains hot enough to cook flatbread. The air is so dry it cracks your lips, so hot it tries to steal your water bottle right out of your hand. And the silence? It's heavy, broken only by the scuttle of a scorpion or the sigh of wind through a bone-white salt flat. You probably wouldn't survive 3 days out here without help, and neither could the Persians until they mastered the impossible, storing winter's ice in the heart of summer. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Wherever you're listening tonight, drop a comment with your city and local time. I always wonder who's drifting through history with me across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward Yazd, a city baked like clay under the Persian sun. It's 500 BCE, and temperatures hit 50 degrees Celsius in summer hot enough to melt lead. Your tunic sticks to your back, and every breath feels like inhaling sandpaper. Around you, people move with slow, deliberate grace, conserving energy like desert foxes. They've adapted. Loose linen robes deflect sunlight, shaded courtyards trap cooler air, and Canaan, those genius underground canals, bring mountain water to the plains. But none of it touches the deep, soul-crushing need for cold. You crave it like water, imagining frost on a window pane, the shock of a snowball down your tunic. Historians still argue whether the first ice house sparked from desperation or royal whimsy may be a Shah's tantrum over warm wine. But either way, the solution would defy physics itself. Mainstream fact, Persian summers weren't just hot. They reshaped empires. Crops withered, armies stalled, and trade routes became death marshes. Without refrigeration, milk soured in hours, meat spoiled by noon, and disease festered in warm water. The fringe twist? Some texts claim priests used moon-chilled stones in rituals before ice houses existed. Rocks left in high deserts where nighttime tongue plummeted, then wrapped in camel fur like sacred popsicles. Quirky, but impractical for cooling a city. You chuckle, picturing a sweaty priest offering a lukewarm deity a fuzzy rock. Behold, divine coolness. Spoiler, it didn't catch on. What did work? Observing nature. See that pigeon tower over there? Its thick clay walls stay cool inside, even at midday a hint. Notice how cellar stairs feel colder descending? Another clue. And those wind catchers on rooftops? They'll scoop breeze like nets later, but the real epiphany came from winter. When frost painted the desert at night, someone asked, "What if we save this?" Simple, mad, revolutionary. You wipe grit from your eyes, squinting at the horizon where a strange, beehive-shaped dome rises part mud, part mystery. That's a yakshal, Persia's answer to the inferno. Its shadow alone feels like mercy. Tomorrow, we'll see how they built these frozen fortresses. For now, though, let the fan's whir mimic desert waves as you sink deeper into cushions. Imagine the relief of stepping inside that dome. A sudden hush, the air smelling of damp earth and secrets, your skin tightening in the cold. Almost like magic, isn't it? But magic's just science no one's explained yet. You're still imagining that delicious chill of the actual, but let's rewind centuries before those icy sanctuaries existed. Picture this, it's 800 BCE Persia, and you're not just feeling the heat, you're negotiating with it. Your sandals slap against cracked earth as you duck into a mud brick house in Susa. Inside, it's marginally cooler, but cool here means only slightly less likely to spontaneously combust. You press your forehead against a wall fig as three sheep stacked sideways and sigh. This is the front line of ancient cooling. Sheer, stubborn architecture. Mainstream fact. Persian builders mastered passive cooling like no one else. Walls were thickened with kasht, windows faced north to avoid direct sun, and courtyards featured reflective pools to bounce heat skyward. It's like nature's own dimmer switch, dialing down the solar rage. But walls alone couldn't cut it. You glance at a porous clay jug sweating in the corner's ear. Someone's filled it with water, and as moisture evaporates through the clay, the contents inside drop a few precious degrees. You take a gulp. It's not cold, but it's bearable. Nearby, a toddler naps on a damp reed mat, while her fan-wielding grandmother mutters about gins bringing hot winds. Quirky tidbit alert. Some texts suggest wealthier Persians hired human fans, slaves waving palm fronds dipped in rose water, while others buried themselves in sand up to their necks during peak heat, like overheated ostriches. Historians still argue whether the sand method was legit survival or just a dramatic way to avoid in-laws. Either way, you try it mentally and chuckle. Nope, still sweating. Also ants. Desperation breeds innovation, though. Outside, you spot a windcatcher badger towering over the roof like a wooden sentinel. Its angled vents snag even the laziest breeze, funneling it down shafts into subterranean rooms called sardabs. You descend into one now, the temperature dropping with each step. It's dim, earthy smelling, and gloriously cool, maybe 20 degrees Celsius cooler than the surface. Families huddle here during scorching afternoons, playing dice or munching melon slices. But there's a catch. Sardabs were humid as a dragon's breath. Your tunic clings damply, and fungus speckles the walls like abstract art. Ancient Persian basement core, you murmur, wiping condensation off a jar of pickled lemons. One joke? Imagine hosting a dinner party down here. Sorry about the moldy decor, but hey, the hummus hasn't liquefied. Now, the real French stuff. Scrolls from Persepolis mention moon vaults, shallow pits where winter ice was occasionally stored beneath layers of straw and salt, but only for weeks, not months. The ice often arrived via donkey caravans from distant mountains, half-melted and ludicrously expensive. A single block might cost a month's wages, reserved for royalty or sacred rituals. One priest's diary describes rubbing ice on a feverish prince's brow, while muttering incantations to Tishtria, the Zoroastrian rain divinity. Be healed, or at least marginally less sweaty. Spoiler, the prince survived, but historians suspect the ice did less work than the placebo effect. You stumble upon the most bizarre hack yet, camel diplomacy. Tribes near Dashti Lut would smear their skin with camel fat at dawn. Theory? It created a greasy barrier against evaporation. Reality? You dab some on your wrist experimentally. It smells like a barnyard disaster and attracts flies. Noble sacrifice for science, you deadpan, scrubbing it off with sand. Modern aside, it's the Bronze Age version of that dodgy aloe vera gel you bought online last summer. By sunset, you're exhausted. The heat ebbs, but the air still tastes like baked pottery. You gaze at the stars, remembering the Yakshul's promise. Those early attempts were band-aids on a sunburn better than nothing, but not revolution. Tomorrow, we'll meet the mad genius who thought, what if we build a mountain to trap winter? For now, though, let your fan's breeze mimic a badger's sigh. Feel that imaginary coolness. Almost there, almost. You're back in Yazd, centuries later, where the air still shimmers like a mirage. But now, instead of sand-buried band-aids, you're witnessing an architectural revolution brewing in a dusty courtyard. Architects huddle over clay tablets, their fingers tracing lines in the grit. One a wiry man with salt and pepper beard sketches a dome so audacious it makes your eyebrows levitate. That's the birth of the actual mainstream fact. These weren't just ice boxes, they were thermodynamic masterpieces. The design fused two worlds, a conical dome above ground to deflect heat and a deep subterranean pit to cradle the ice. The dome's shape wasn't accidental. It mimicked termite mounds, nature's own climate controllers, compressing hot air upward while shielding the vault below. You lean closer, squinting at the blueprint. The walls? A secret recipe called sarouge. Sand, clay, egg whites, goat hair, and ash mixed into an insulator tougher than concrete. Historians still argue whether the goat hair was structural genius or just a cheap way to repurpose shed livestock sweaters. Watch the chief architect, Rustam, poke a scale model with a reed pen. The dome must breathe but not sweat, he mutters. Translation: tiny ventilation shafts would perforate the base, letting hot air escape while trapping cool air inside. Quirky tidbit. Legends claim Rostam dreamt the design after watching a desert hedgehog hurl into a ball spiky exterior, cool belly tucked safe within. You stifle a laugh. So Persia's greatest invention was basically ... rodent cosplay? Rostam glares, as if hearing you across millennia. His apprentice nervously suggests adding lion statues for awe factor. Rostam's reply: lions melt. Mud doesn't. Now, the real fringe whispers of ice alchemy. Some scrolls describe adding layers of salt between ice blocks, which actually lowers water's freezing point, making the ice last longer. But fringe theorists insist priests secretly layered ground lapis lazuli into the sarouge, believing the blue stone channeled lunar cold. You imagine workers sprinkling precious gem dust like fairy glitter. For that extra chilly vibe, you whisper, practical? No, poetic. Absolutely. Sensory overload hits as Rostam tests materials. He hands you a sarouge brick. It's shockingly light, porous as pumice, and cool to the touch even under the noonday sun. Beside it, a regular mud brick feels like a furnace brick. This one's for peasants, Rostam sniffs. You juggle both, fumbling the hot one. Yep, definitely peasant grade. Nearby, a scale model dome sweats under a lamp. Rostam's rival, Farhad, scoffs. Your breathing shafts are just drafts waiting to happen. The ensuing argument over airflow dynamics involves wild hand gestures and a thrown date pit. Ancient nerd fight, still more civilized than modern Twitter. But the breakthrough? Canal integration. Rostam's eyes light up as he maps canals beneath the blueprint. Winter meltwater would flow via Kanat into shallow pools beside the actual. On freezing nights, thin layers of water would turn to ice, ready for harvest. The dome's shadow would slow the melt come dawn. We're not storing ice, Rostam declares. We're trapping winter's ghost. You get chills, and not just from the metaphor. Debate flares over orientation. North-south alignment maximizes shade, but Farhad insists east-west captures first light cold. Rostam retorts, since when is dawn cold in Persia? The compromise? Slight tilt toward prevailing winds. You scribble notes, feeling like a spy at the world's nerdiest summit. As dusk bleeds into indigo, Rostam stands back, satisfied. His design is complete, a fortress of mud and wit against the sun's tyranny. You trace the dome's curve in the air. It looks like a giant sandcastle built by physics-obsessed gods. Tomorrow, we'll get dirty mixing Saruj. For now, though, let your fan's breeze mimic those ventilation shafts. Cool air rising, heat escaping ... pop perfection. Sunrise stains the skyline apricot as you join the construction crew at the nascent Yakshul site. Rostam's blueprint is now a frenzy of activity, and you are wrist-deep in a vat of glistening. Sticky muck that smells like wet dog and forgotten omelets. Welcome to Saruj Mixing, ancient Persia's answer to rocket science, but with more goat hair. Mainstream fact? This mortar wasn't just insulation, it was a thermal force field. The base recipe reads like a witch's grocery list. Volcanic ash, river clay, sand, crushed limestone, egg whites, and yes, fistfuls of coarse goat hair. Rostam oversees your vat, nodding as you knead the sludgy mass. The hair stops cracks, he explains, like spider silk in a web. Historians still argue whether the egg whites were purely structural or held ritual significance. Zoroastrians associated eggs with purity and cosmic order. You flick a strand of goat fleece off your tunic. Or maybe someone just really hated breakfast. Sensory immersion hits hard. The saruj squelches cold between your fingers, gritty yet elastic. Nearby, a laborer tosses an ash from last night's figwood fire, releasing an acrid puff that makes you cough. Kill ash, Rostam says. Traps air pockets tiny prisms for heat. You marvel at the simplicity. Microscopic voids in the dried mortar would resist conductive heat like a million Lilliputian shields. Quirky twist? Scrolls from Shiraz mention adding ground walnut shells for extra crunch. You toss a handful into your vat experimentally. Rostam raises an eyebrow. Innovation or snack break? No, the application. Teams slather the chunky paste onto the yakshil's rising walls using wooden trowels. The dome's curvature demands precision too thin, and the sun wins. Too thick, and the structure groans under its own weight. You watch a craftsman embed twisted reeds into the wet saruj, creating a reinforcing lattice. Like bones and flesh, he grunts. Temperature matters. Apply in cool morning hours, or the mixture dries too fast and flakes. A joke? Imagine the Yelp review. Great insulation, but my actual tastes faintly of barnyard. 2 stars. Fringe alert. Local lore claims certain yakchuls used night-charged saruj mixed, only under full moons by virgin laborers chanting hymns to Vayu, god of wind. Moonbeams boost cooling. Insists an old mason, winking. You glance at Rostam, who mutters nonsense. but night air is cooler for mixing. Practical genius wrapped in mysticism. The real test comes at noon. Rostam leads you to a test wall, one side smeared with sarouj, the other plain mud. You press your palm against each. The mud side radiates furnace-like heat. The sarouj side feels eerily cool, like shaded stone. Thermal inertia in action. The composite absorbs heat slowly, then releases it overnight. Like the desert itself breathing, you murmur. A laborer jokes, slapping sarouj on his forehead. Instant headache cure. Rostam doesn't laugh. Save it for the walls, Hafez. But the debate rages. Why goat hair? Camels were more abundant. Some scholars argue it was ritualistic goats symbolized vitality and Zoroastrianism. Others cite practicality. Goat hair's scaly texture bonded better with clay. You pluck a stray hair from the vat. Sorry, Mr. Goat. Your sacrifice shall not melt. As shadows lengthen, the dome rises a smooth, tawny curve against the cobalt sky. Its double-layered walls create a thermal buffer zone. You run a hand over the drying surface. It's already resisting the sun's glare, a silent warrior in the heat wars. Tomorrow, we'll crown it with wind catchers. For now, though, let your fans hum, mimic the slap of wet mortar. Feel that imagined coolness seeping through. The desert's about to meet its match. The eggshell dome now stands like a giant sandcastle, but it's still just silent monument without its crowning glory. You crane your neck as workers hoist wooden lattice frames onto the roof, the skeletal beginnings of badgers, Persia's ancient air conditioning. Rostam points to the northern horizon where the wind whispers secrets. See how the breeze dances? We'll catch it mid-step. Mainstream fact. Wind catchers weren't decorative. They were precision-engineered climate tools. Their orientation was calculated using Pajihesh to align with summer's prevailing winds. The taller the tower, the higher it reached cooler air currents. Some soared 30 feet like wooden storks hunting for zephyrs. Historians still argue whether the lattice patterns were purely functional or encoded astrological symbols for wind deities. You squint at the geometric precision. Or maybe Rostam just really liked tic-tac-toe. Now, the mechanics. Imagine the badger as a greedy mouth gulping wind. Its angled vents snag breezes and funnel them down a central shaft into the yakshal's belly. But here's the genius. As cold air sinks, hot air inside rises through secondary shafts, creating a self-sustaining convection loop. Rostam drops a feather into the intake. You watch it spiral down the dark passage like a drunken butterfly. No fans, no electricity, just physics doing Pilates. You murmur. Quirky twist. Some badgers featured wetted reed mats at the base, evaporative cooling boosting the chill. A worker dips a mat in Kenat water and hangs it, like giving the wind a cold washcloth. He grins. But the fringe stuff is wilder. Scrolls from Kerman describe singing badgers, towers with precisely spaced holes that hummed specific frequencies and strong winds. Locals believe the vibrations scared away heat demons. You press your ear to a half-built shaft as a gust whistles through. It sounds like a seashell's whisper crossed with a didgeridoo. Demon-repelling as Sanmar, Rostam scoffs. Nonsense. But the sound does scare birds from nesting inside. Practicality disguised as magic. Sensory time. You climb inside a completed badger. The wooden lattice casts a zebra stripes of sunlight on your arms. The air smells of cedar resin and dust, and the wind's direction shifts constantly, a tactile compass against your skin. When a strong gust hits, the tower groans like an old ship, and a sudden river of coolness washes down the shaft. You shiver involuntarily. Who needs a sea when you have sky lungs? Debate flares over aesthetics. Farhad arrives advocating ornate carvings, dragons on the vents. They'll frighten hot air away. Rostam counters. Dragons add weight. Wayne needs wings, not art. They're compromise. Minimalist geometric patterns, functional beauty. You trace a carved hexagon. The ancient equivalent of less is more, and less likely to collapse. Now the ultimate test. At sunset, workers seal the Yakchal entrance. You stand outside as temperatures plummet. The badgers begin inhaling night air crisp, dense, and desert cold. Downstairs in the ice chamber, you press your palm against the wall. It's already shedding daytime heat like a snake shedding skin. Rostam places a cup of water on the floor. By dawn, it'll sport a frosty skin. Winter's ghost captured, he whispers. But one mystery remains: how to link this sky-cooled sanctuary to the lifeblood of ice. Tomorrow, we'll follow the Kanet's liquid threads from mountain peaks to desert veins. For now, though, let your fan's breeze mimic the badger's breath. Cool air descending, warm air rising. The desert's heartbeat slowed. You're still feeling that phantom chill from the badger's breath, but now Rostam nudges you toward the lifeline of this entire frozen endeavor, the Kanat. Forget rivers Persia's arteries run underground. Mainstream fact. These hand-dug tunnels are engineering sorcery. Imagine a subterranean highway for meltwater, snaking from snow-capped mountains like the Zagros Range down to blistering deserts, all by gravity alone. Historians still argue whether Canaanites originated with the Persians or were borrowed from the Eurasians, but either way, Persia perfected them. You're hiking toward the source now, boots crunching on alpine gravel where the air tastes like mint and ice. Far below, Yaz bakes like clay in a kiln. Water is lazy, Rostam says. We convince it to walk to the desert. Your first stop, a mother well. It's not a well as you'd picture, just a gaping hole in the mountainside where snowmelt seeps from rock fractures. Workers lower buckets, hauling up water clearer than a hawk's eye, but the magic begins downhill. You follow Rostam to a series of vertical shafts, maiden dotting the slope like lunar craters. Each shaft plunges 20 to 50 meters down to a gently sloping tunnel, wide enough to crawl through. This is where the Mukanas descend daily, their world reduced to flickering oil lamps and the drip, drip, drip of percolating earth. Quirky tidbit. Mukanas reportedly navigated pitch-black tunnels using sound-tapping walls to gauge soil density and taste-tested soil to detect salt content. You lick a damp stone experimentally, mostly rock flavored. Rostam chuckles. Save your tongue for ice later. Sensory shift hits hard. You squeeze into the Kanat behind a digger. Instantly, the temperature plummets. The air hangs thick with the smell of wet limestone and ancient roots. Condensation beads on your arms. Your lamp throws wobbling shadows on walls carved with generations of pickaxe scars. The tunnel slopes precisely 1 to 1,000 a drop of just 1 meter per kilometer to keep water flowing without eroding the channel. Ancient Persian spreadsheet math, you whisper. A Mukani carves a hash mark into the wall one of thousands tracking distance. Next village, 3,000 breaths away. he rasps. Fringe lore alert. Legends claim some canets followed water veins, mapped by dowsers wielding forked willow branches. Others whisper of Jinn guardians demanding offerings, figs tossed down shafts to appease tunnel-collapsing spirits. Rostam scoffs but admits, "We lost 3 men last year to a cave-in near Kerman. Some say they heard laughter first. You touch the damp earth. Note to self, pack extra figs." Now, the human cost. Mykonos were Persia's unsung astronauts, facing suffocation, floods, and venomous snakes in the gloom. They worked in rotating teams: diggers, bucket haulers, air pump operators. Pay, often in water rights or barley. Yet their guilds held immense social power. Cut the Kanab, and you'd starve a city. One joke, a Mukani's wife complains, "All day underground and he still tracks mud on my rugs." As you emerge, blinking into sunlight, the Kanet's water glints silver in a stone channel. It's racing toward Yazd and the Yakshil's waiting pools. But winter hasn't yet bitten the mountains. Rostam eyes the sky. Soon, the first freeze is coming. You shiver, imagining this liquid ribbon hardening into ice. Debate flares. How did they maintain flow without modern tools? Some scholars credit celestial navigation aligning tunnels with stars. Others insist it was trial and bloody error. You trace the water's path with your finger. It's a ledger written in mud and sweat. Tomorrow we'll stand knee-deep in that freeze. For now, though, let your fan's whir mimic the Mukani's pickaxe. Distant, rhythmic, patient, carving cold from stone. Winter finally claws its way into the desert, and oh, what a shock to the system. Just weeks ago, you were sweating through your tunic. Now you're huddled by a dung fire at dawn, breath fogging the air like a dragon's curse. Rostam thrusts a copper pickaxe into your numb hands. "Time to farm what doesn't grow," he grins. You stare across the Kanet-fed irrigation fields, transformed overnight into a glistening chessboard of shallow pools called Jub. Each rectangle mirrors the peach-colored sky, thin ice skinning the surface like cellophane. Mainstream fact: this was precision meteorology. Teams monitored nightly temperatures using alcohol and glass thermometers and knew exactly when the water would freeze solid. Historians still argue whether the ice was pure enough for royalty or laced with desert grit, but tonight perfection is the goal. You shuffle toward the nearest job, boots crunching on frost-bleached reeds. So this is ancient Persian ice fishing ... minus the fish. And fun. The harvest begins before first light. You join a crew of Yakshul laborers lowest rung on Persia's social ladder, their faces wrapped in wool scarves against the knife-edged wind. Your job: scrape the night's ice formation without breaking it. You kneel at the pool's edge, driving your pickaxe in a grid pattern. The first crack echoes like a gunshot in the stillness. Quirky tidbit: workers hummed rhythmic chants, Barfi Sork, Barfi Sifid, to synchronize strikes. Legend claimed offbeat strikes angered the frost spirit Sarma, who'd sabotaged the ice. Try explaining that to your foreman, you mutter, nearly cracking your grid line. Rostam barks, less chat, more ice. This isn't a philosophy symposium. Sensory overload, the cold bites through your gloves. Each ice slab you pry up is translucent, veined with trapped air bubbles, and shockingly heavy. You heave a 20 kg sheet onto a donkey sled, it glows pink with dawn's first light. Your fingers ache deep in the joints. Frostbite, nature's way of saying, slow down, you groan. A laborer laughs, rubbing his ears with snow. Wait till you lose a toe. Then you'll really have balance issues. Now the fringe magic. Some foremen scattered handfuls of salt on the jub before freezing. Counterintuitive? Absolutely, but salt lowered water's freezing point, creating thinner, more brittle ice that shattered cleanly. Others swore by moonwater ice, pools filled only during full moons for purer chill. You examine a salt-treated slab. It fractures like tempered glass. Science disguised as witchcraft, you whisper. Rostam overhears. Witchcraft would be warmer. Debate flares over labor conditions. Texts depict harvesters as seasonal freelancers paid in wheat and wool. But cuneiform receipts from Susa suggest debt slaves formed the backbone of crews. Historians still argue whether these workers were exploited or revered for holding winter in their hands. You watch a teenage boy haul ice with raw, bleeding palms. His pay, a wedge of frozen goat cheese. Call it what you want, you murmur, but this isn't a living, it's surviving. Transport becomes a ballet of desperation. Donkey sleds slither across the frost, drivers lashing stubborn animals. Move, you hairy glacier, one yells. You help push a stuck sled, boots sliding on ice. A slab tumbles, shattering like crystal. The foreman's face darkens. That came from your ration, clumsy. Joke? Imagine the Persian Yelp review, ice delivery service, 1 star. Donkey ate my share. Also frostbite. As the sun crests the dunes, the race intensifies. Ice melts fast, even at 0 degrees Celsius. Desert sun turns slabs to weeping ghosts. You sprint the last load toward the actual escaping entrance, where straw and salt await. Rostam inspects your haul, snapping a corner off a slab. It's diamond clear. Good. This one's for the Shah's sherbet, he says. You pocket the fragment of frozen trophy. But the real mystery? Black ice. Scrolls mention rare midnight harvest during dust storms, when wind-blown silt froze into dark, streaked sheets. Priests used it in shadow rituals, believing it trapped darkness itself. You squint at the rising sun. No thanks, I'll take my cold without demonic garnish. Tomorrow, we descend into the Yakshul's belly to stash this frozen treasure. For now, though, let your fan's breeze mimic that desert wind sharp, clean, and smelling of imminent snow. Flex your fingers. Still there? Good. Winter's bounty is secured. The Yakshul's entrance yawns before you like the mouth of an earthen giant, exhaling a breath so cold it crystallizes your eyelashes. You follow the ice-laden sleds into darkness, leaving the desert dawn behind. Inside, it's another world, a cathedral of cold. Saruj walls swallow sound, leaving only the crunch of boots on scattered straw and the donkey's nervous snorts. Rostam lights a tallow lamp. Its guttering flame casts dancing shadows on the vaulted dome overhead, where hoarfrost glitters like constellations. Welcome to Winter's vault, he whispers. Mainstream fact, this wasn't haphazard storage. Ice sacking followed a sacred geometry, blocks layered like bricks, separated by insulation sandwiches of straw, salt, and wait for it sawdust. Historians still argue whether the sawdust was practical or symbolic. You grab a handful, it smells of pine resin and frozen earth. Definitely not IKEA approved. Sensory shock hits hard. The air bites with a dry metallic chill that seeps into your bones. Frost feathers the walls where badger-cooled moisture froze mid-trickle. Workers move with ritual slowness, their breath pluming in the lamplight. You join the straw team, spreading armfuls of sun-bleached barley stalks over the packed earth floor. Think of it as tucking ice into bed, murmurs Zara, a woman with ice-burned knuckles. Straws the blanket, salts the lullaby, quirky tidbit. Some crews chanted Kabisard, while layering, believing ice had a spirit needing soothing. Rostam scoffs but admits, quiet ice melts slower, fact. Now, the stacking ballet. Teams hoist ice slabs onto the straw bed. Each block gets a dusting of salt, not table salt, but coarse namaki daria. Salt absorbs moisture, creating a brine barrier that slows melting. You sprinkle some over a slab, watching crystals glitter like tiny diamonds. Ancient Persian cryonics, you murmur. A laborer jokes, patting a block. Sleep tight, frosty prints. See you in July. Fringe alert. Scrolls from Isfahan describe blood ice, slabs splashed with sacrificial lamb's blood before storage. Priests claimed it warded off heat jinns seeking to devour the cold. You spot rust-colored streaks on one block. Rostam shrugs. Ox slipped during transport, but let the priest call it holy. Practicality with a side of superstition. Debate flares over orientation. Farhad's crew stacks ice vertically, while Rostam insists horizontal layering. Their compromise? Angled stacks like fallen dominoes. You help tilt a slab, fingers numb through wool mittens. Compromise, the original duct tape of civilization, you quip. Rostam's glare could freeze fire. The human hierarchy reveals itself. At the chamber's heart, master stackers place flawless royal ice clear, thick slabs destined for palaces. Outer layers hold cloudy market ice for merchants. In corners, frost-scarred laborers chip workers' ice fragments for themselves. A young boy sneaks a sliver into his mouth, eyes wide with bliss. First taste of winter in hell, you whisper. Zara nods. We call it dust of angels. But the true secret? Sawdust finale. After 6 ice straw salt layers, workers dump mounds of fragrant sawdust over everything, burying the hoard under an aromatic blanket. It's shockingly effective. The dust's air pockets create a thermal buffer. You plunge your arm elbow deep. Beneath the dust, the ice feels startlingly solid. Like finding a glacier under your pillow, you marvel. Rostam tugs you back. Leave it. Disturbed ice wakes angry. As the last sled empties, workers seal the chamber with a sarouge-coated door. Rostam presses his ear against it. Hear that? Silence. That's the sound of victory. Outside, the desert sun climbs, but in here, winter sleeps. One mystery lingers: ice guardians. Texts mention yakshoulders, elderly men who lived in adjacent chambers all summer, listening for meltwater drips. Some claimed they could smell thawing ice. You peer into a tiny side room, a pallet, a can water jug, prayer beads. The original basement dwellers, you whisper, with better purpose. Tomorrow we'll fast forward to summer's peak and the grand retrieval. For now, though, let your fans hum mimic that sacred silence. Feel the cold seeping up through imagined stone. Winter's captured. Rest now. Months bleed into the furnace blast of high summer. Yazd shimmers like a mirage, heat rippling off mud brick walls until the city itself seems to melt. You wipe sweat from your brow, it evaporates before hitting your collar. This is why we buried winter. Rostam stands before the Yakshul's sealed entrance, a copper pry bar gleaming in his hand. Time to wake the sleeper, he murmurs. Around you, laborers shift nervously. Opening day is part ritual, part high-stakes gamble. Mainstream fact: less than 30% melt loss was considered a triumph. Some elite Yakchils boasted as little as 10%, thanks to perfect stacking and constant badger airflow. Historians still argue whether master ice keepers used rudimentary thermometers or just spat on the door to gauge internal humidity. Rostam spits experimentally. The saliva sizzles away on hot sarouge. Dry as a mummy's cough. Good. The door groans open. A gasp escapes the crowd, not sound, cold. An Arctic exhalation rolls over you, so shocking after the desert's oven breath that your lungs seize. Frost crystals glitter in the gloom beyond, swirling in the shaft of sunlight like drunken fireflies. Step carefully, Rostam warns. Summer's waiting to pounce. You cross the threshold. Instantly, the world hushes. Sarouge walls swallow the city's clamor, leaving only the drip-drip of distant meltwater and the crunch of sawdust underfoot. The air smells of frozen earth, old straw, and secrets. Your sweat chills to an icy foam. Welcome back, you whisper to the sleeping giant. Retrieval is a surgical strike. Workers move with hushed urgency, their breath pluming in lantern light. Rostam points to a sawdust mound intact, dry, betraying no melt pools beneath. First layer, market ice, quirky tidbit. Retrievers often wore felt overshoes to avoid melting ice with bare soles. You strap on a pair clumsy, silent, like walking on dead moths. Fashion meets function, you mutter, shuffling forward. Now, the unveiling. Workers brush sawdust aside with goose feather dusters. Beneath, the salt straw layers emerge, glittering like a frozen lasagna. The ice beneath is foggy, but solid months buried have clouded it with trapped air. Rostam chips a corner with a bronze chisel. The fracture rings like a bell. Still sings. He smiles. A fringe scroll from Ray claimed cursed ice, turned black and hissed upon retrieval. Rostam scoffs. Rot. Ice rots if stacked wet. Sounds like a lazy ice keeper's excuse. But the technique is mesmerizing. Workers slide wooden sledges under entire ice slabs, leveraging them up with minimal handling. Contact melts ice fingertips are thieves of cold. You help guide a slab onto a sledge. It's shockingly dense, colder than deep stone. Like touching a mountain's bone, you murmur. A laborer whispers, she hears you. Joke? Imagine the ice's inner monologue. Ugh, humans again. Can a glacier nap in peace? Debate flares over speed versus preservation. Farhad's crew rushes, dripping sweat onto precious blocks. Rostam halts them. Wipe your brows. Every drop is a dagger to winter. Towels appear rough hemp cloths dunked in Connaught water and wrung ice cold. Cool your necks, fools. Melt starts with you. You press the cloth to your throat. Bliss. Then the treasure, the heart layer. Rostam parts the final salt straw blanket like a curtain. Here lies the royal ice, crystalline, almost transparent, stacked in flawless columns. Sunlight filtering through the badger shafts makes it glow blue-white, like captured moonlight. A collective sigh ripples through the workers. This ice would grace the Shah's sherbet, cool royal fevers, perhaps even preserve a noble's corpse for burial. You touch a block smooth as glass, bitingly cold. Diamonds of the desert, Rostam intones. But the reality check. Time is the enemy. The moment ice leaves the actual, melting begins. Donkey carts wait outside, draped in soaked burlap. Workers sprint slabs across the threshold. A handoff so swift it feels like passing a newborn. Outside, burlap-wrapped blocks are loaded, straw mats piled atop. A driver lashes his donkey. Fly, you frozen snail. To the palace. One last fringe mystery, whispering ice. Elder retrievers claimed flawless royal blocks emitted a faint hum, winter's song, when struck. Rostam taps a small slab. A low thrum resonates in your chest. Just trapped air escaping. He shrugs. But in the worker's eyes, it's magic. As the last royal block departs, Rostam reseals the chamber. Outside, the desert sun blazes, already licking at the burlap-wrapped carts lumbering toward the bazaar. You stand in the doorway, 1 foot in winter, 1 in summer. The transition is brutal. Tomorrow, we'll follow that ice into the sweating heart of Persia. For now, though, let your fan's breeze mimic that first gasp of escaping cold sharp, clean and fleeting as a dream of snow. The ice block's journey from Yakchal to Bazaar feels like escorting a snowflake through hell. You jog beside the donkey cart, its burlap-wrapped cargo already weeping dark stains onto the dusty road. Sunlight hammers your shoulders as you dodge date vendors and pottery-laden camels. Faster, hisses the driver, whipping the donkey's haunches. This isn't sightseeing. Mainstream fact. Ice was Persia's ultimate luxury commodity. A single block could cost a month's wages for a laborer, placing it alongside saffron and lapis lazuli in value. Historians still argue whether the exorbitant pricing reflected actual scarcity or artificial elitism engineered by ice guild monopolies. You glance at the melting treasure. Definitely feels like getting robbed by thermodynamics. Entering the bazaar is sensory warfare. The stench of dung, rose water, and frying lamb collides with the metallic tang of sweating copperware. Hawkers shriek prices over donkey brays and hammer strikes. Your cart veers toward the Kuch di Barf, where shaded stalls display weeping slabs on beds of straw. A merchant in a sweat-stained turban prods your delivery with a rusty pick. Cloudy, he declares, frowning at air bubbles trapped within. Discount price. Rostam, suddenly appearing, slaps his hand away. That cloud is trapped winter breath. Full price or I take it to the bathhouse. Quirky tidbit. Ice merchants were notorious for spraying slabs with mint water before display, not just for scent, but to mask melt lines. Ancient Persian product Photoshop, you mutter. Now the social ballet. A veiled noblewoman servant approaches, haggling for royal-grade ice. Rostam unwraps a clearer block, its edges already softening like candle wax. For your lady's sherbet, he purrs, chiseling a sliver for her to taste. She closes her eyes as it dissolves on her tongue. Like swallowing starlight, she sighs. Nearby, a baker barters day-old flatbreads for fist-sized chunks to cool his dough cellar. No starlight for you, eh? You joke. He shrugs. Starlight doesn't stop my yogurt from curdling. Fringe alert. Scrolls describe ice divination in markets merchants, reading melt patterns to predict droughts or plagues. A slab fracturing in spiderweb veins meant poor harvests. Smooth melting signaled royal weddings. You watch a merchant study a puddle under his stall. See, the gins are drinking sideways. Bad omen. Rostam rolls his eyes. Or your stall's uneven, Hassan? Palace delivery is another world. You follow Rostam through gates guarded by spearmen whose scale armor gleams like fish skin. Inside, cannot-fed fountains mist the air, but the heat still clings. In a marble-paved kitchen, a eunuch overseer tests your ice with a silver dagger. Satisfied, he directs slaves to chisel it into spheres floating in golden bowls of pomegranate sherbet. For the Shah's afternoon respite, he sniffs. Joke? You whisper to Rostam. Think he'd notice if we stole a sphere? Rostam's reply, only when your head rolls faster than the ice. But the true revelation? Daily miracles. You trail a sliver of worker's ice to a physician's cramped stall. He presses it against a child's swollen eye, a makeshift compress for infection. Cold numbs the pain, he explains. In a dyer's workshop, ice cools vats of indigo to stabilize the pigment. Hot vats make muddy blue, the dyer barks. Even the brothel down the street buys shavings to chill wine for wealthy clients. Multi-purpose luxury, you know, from fevers to dot fevers. Debate flares over accessibility. While nobles imported mountain ice for summer parties, desert nomads used cab's goat skin bags buried in damp sand for evaporative cooling. Historians still argue whether this poor man's ice was effective or just less hot misery. You try it later, burying a water skin. After 3 hours, it's lukewarm. Yep, definitely misery. As dusk bleeds into violet, you watch a street vendor sell the day's last slivers to laborers. They cradle melting fragments in calloused hands, holding them to foreheads and wrists. No sherbet, no ceremony, just raw relief against the dying heat. One man closes his eyes. Tastes like not being on fire. But the ice's final journey is the quietest, to the Yakshil Dar's tiny room. Rostam delivers a palm-sized block payment for a summer of listening. The old man places it on a clay saucer, watching it shrink like a dying moon. Next winter, he whispers. Always next winter. Tomorrow we'll see how this frozen alchemy preserved not just food, but lives. For now, though, let your fan's breeze mimic that market chaos distant, muffled, fading into the hum of night. The actual Dar's ice block is now a shrinking puddle on his clay saucer, but its ghost lives on in 100 unexpected corners of Persia. You slip out of his dim chamber into the city's twilight bustle, where the legacy of that frozen harvest isn't just about luxury, it's about cheating decay itself. Mainstream fact. Ice revolutionized Persian food preservation like nothing before. In bakery cellars, butchers' stalls, and date wine fermentaries, cold became the invisible shield against spoilage. You duck into a dairy courtyard where a farmer packs clay pots of yogurt and goat cheese into straw-lined alcoves chilled by fist-sized ice chunks. Without cold, milk turns cruel by noon, he mutters, wiping his hands on a saffron-stained apron. Historians still argue whether ice extended shelf life enough to transform trade routes or merely cushioned elite diets. You sniff a pot of day-old yogurt, tangy but fresh. Seems persuasive to me. The real magic unfolds in meat markets. A butcher hangs lamb carcasses in a back room where ice shavings cascade from a ceiling grate like frozen rain. Below, blood drips into sand-filled troughs while the air hums with flies denied their feast. Cold slows death's gossip. The butcher grins, sawing through a chilled haunch. Quirky tidbit. Some vendors buried offal in ice sawdust coffins for weeks, claiming it made lamb kidneys taste mountain fresh. You decline his offer to sample a month-old specimen. My stomach's heroic, but not that heroic. Medical miracles beckon next. You follow a physician's apprentice carrying a bronze bowl of ice slivers through streets, smelling of cumin and open sewers. Inside a cramped infirmary, the doctor presses an ice poultice to a soldier's gangrenous foot. Inflammation fears winter's kiss, he declares. Mainstream medicine? Persian physicians like Rhazes prescribed ice for fever reduction, swollen joints, and even melancholic humors. The soldier grits his teeth as numbness battles pain. Better than leeches? You whisper. The doctor winks, less chatty. But the fringe twists are wilder. Scrolls from Persepolis detail ice magic rituals, freezing herbs in moon-shaped molds to capture healing spirits, or rubbing ice on barren women's bellies under full moons to thaw the womb. One priestess swears frozen pomegranate seeds cured impotence if placed exactly where the sun doesn't shine. Ancient Persian Viagra popsicles, you murmur. Hard pass. Sensory interlude. You enter a confectioner's workshop where sherbet simmers in cannot-cooled copper vats. The air thrums with sweetness rosewater, crushed pistachios, and the sharp zest of limes. A boy chisels ice into snowflakes, dusting them over honeyed figs. You steal a sliver. It melts on your tongue, carrying the ghost of winter into summer's throat. Like eating a cloud that fought back, you sigh. The master confectioner slaps your hand. That cloud cost 2 dirhams. Debate flares over scale. While nobles iced entire banquet tables, commoners relied on trickle-down chill tavern keepers, floating pebble-sized chips in wine jugs, or fruit sellers nesting melons in straw sprinkled with ice dust. Historians still argue whether this democratized cooling or just teased the poor with frozen crumbs. You watch a street urchin like condensation off a fishmonger's ice crate. His grin says more than any scroll. Now, the darker side, preservation's illusions. In a royal kitchen, you see ice-gilded deception-spoiled quail masked in rose ice glaze, or sour milk sweetened with snow and honey. The Shah hates waste, a cook shrugs, burying dubious lamb in mint-flaked ice. And salmonella, you ask? Blank stare. Right, ancient superpower, ignorance. But ISIS triumph, pharmacy vaults. An apothecary shows you clay jars sealed with ice wax plugs, preserving delicate herbs like saffron and foxglove. Heat murders cures, he whispers, revealing a frost-rimmed jar of opium poppy extract. This saved the satrap's son from convulsions. Fringe theorists claim ice-altered herbs gained spirit potency, but you note the labels. Dose, grain of rice. Side effects, eternal map. Laughter echoes from a bathhouse where laborers pay coppers to plunge into ice-chilled pools after furnace shifts. Shocks the laziness out, one shivers, emerging lobster pink. You dip a toe, your spine screams. Yep, laziness officially shocked. As night falls, you spot the physician soldier limping home, his foot bandaged but saved. Ice did that. Not magic, not prayer, just winter's stubborn ghost refusing to surrender. Tomorrow, we'll meet the forgotten hands that conjured this cold, the workers who paid in frostbite for Persia's comfort. For now, though, let your fan's breeze mimic that apothecary's felt cool, still and heavy with the scent of preserved possibilities. You're sipping mint tea in a Yazd caravanserai when Rostam slams down a clay ledger, its surface etched with columns of dashes and circles. Meet the ghosts who built winter, he growls. The marks aren't numbers, they're fingerprints pressed into clay by illiterate workers tracking their days. Here, far from sherbet-sipping nobles, lies the human engine of Persia's ice empire. Mainstream fact, ice labor was caste-bound. At the bottom, mucanas, often debt slaves or prisoners. Above them, seasonal ice harvesters, then skilled stackers. Finally, yak shoulders guarding the vault. Historians still argue whether this hierarchy reflected Zoroastrian purity laws or raw economic exploitation. You trace a faded thumbprint. Meet Amir. He dug tunnels until his lungs filled with mud. Dawn finds you shivering beside the jug pools again, but now you see the harvest crew. Rashid, a boy of 12 chipping ice with blue-nailed hands. Zara, her face scarred by frostbite, wrapping slabs in straw. Old Cameron, who lost 3 toes last winter but still supervises. No ice, no bread, Zara shrugs, her breath frosting the air. They work in silence, punctuated by coughs as stark contrast to the bazaar's clamor. Quirky tidbit. Harvesters wore left-handed mittens only. Superstition held that the right hand stole cold if exposed, angering Sarma. Try chipping ice one-handed, you mutter, fumbling a slab. Rashid giggles until Cameron barks. Laugh melts Ice Boy. Now, the Kana underworld. You descend with Burrows, a Mukani whose arms are ropey from hauling buckets. The shaft swallows you damp, claustrophobic, the air thick with silt and the reek of sweating limestone. Burrows lights a fish oil lamp. Watch for snakes, he rasps. And ghosts, adds his partner, pointing to scratch marks on the wall. Djinns love drowning diggers. Mainstream reality, collapses were common. Mechanics died at twice the rate of soldiers. Compensation? A debt erased, or a son spared from conscription. Burroughs shows his leisure mark, 1,000 dashes. 1 dash per bucket. My freedom costs 10,000. You count as calluses. Bank of blisters, you whisper. Fringe rituals emerge. At the yak shoal, stackers anoint door frames with goat's blood before sealing, whispering to the ice mother for mercy. During retrieval, workers avoid stepping on shadows. Melt follows footsteps. A yak Childar claims he dreams of ice singing warnings. High C means cracks, bass notes mean djinns. Rostam scoffs. Nonsense. But dreams do mean bad air in the chamber. Debate rages. Were ice workers revered or reviled? Texts describe stackers as cold priests, yet their quarters reeked of wet wool and decay. Historians still argue whether their frostburns were badges of honor or marks of shame. You watch Zara rub rancid butter on her scars. Honor stinks, she smirks. Palace ingratitude stings sharpest. You accompany Rostam delivering royal ice. The steward eyes Rashid's threadbare tunic. Keep your filth off the marble, he sneers, tossing a copper coin into the dust. Rostam pockets it, jaw tight. Later, he buys Rashid a candied date. Sweetness for bitterness, he grunts. Joke? Imagine the Shah's reaction if he knew his sherbet cost the child's fingertips, or meant less blood next time. But the true injustice? Knowledge hoarded. Master stackers like Rostam guarded techniques fiercely apprenticeship required 10 years. When Zara suggests lining pits with leather to reduce melt, he shakes his head. Women's ideas melt faster. You glare. So does ice in the sun? Try logic. He blinks, startled. As night falls, workers gather around a dung fire. Burroughs plays a reed flute, a mournful tune about mountains he's never seen. Cameron recounts the great melt of 412 BCE when a Yakcho failed and nobles wept over warm wine. We lost 6 stackers that summer, he murmurs. Frozen debtor's prison. Rashid sleeps curled against Zara, his mittened hand clutching an ice chip like a toy. One last fringe, ice madness. Scrolls mention laborers who licked walls until tongues froze or stole into vaults to sleep forever cool. Burroughs points to a Mukani rocking in shadows. Hassan, dug too deep, heard the earth's heartbeat. Now he listens for meltwater in dry wells. Tomorrow we'll see how this icy genius escaped Persia's borders. For now, though, let your fans breeze mimic their oases, flute thin, reedy, carrying the weight of mountains unseen. Rostam's Yakshul stands proud near Yazd, but travel 500 miles southeast to the Persian Gulf Coast, and the rules of cold change entirely. You're in Hormuz now, where humidity clings like a wet shroud and salt crusts every surface. Here, ice houses shed their desert austerity for coastal cunning vicar Saruj. Walls laced with crushed seashells to repel corrosive salt air, and wind catchers twisted seaward to snag moisture-laden breezes. Ocean's breath is a fickle friend, mutters a local builder, patting a mortar mix reeking of brine and dried squid. Mainstream fact: coastal Yakshuls traded depth for breath-shallow, sprawling vaults to disperse groundwater seepage, with ice layered in wax-sealed reed baskets. Historians still argue whether these adaptations arose from trial and error or borrowed knowledge from Indian Ocean traders. You taste the gritty air. Definitely trial by sweat. Now follow the Silk Road northwest to Ottoman Anatolia. In Konya, ice houses morph into karliks, squat, stone-lined pits capped with timber domes. Ottoman engineers added lead sheeting beneath insulation to block Earth's warmth, while snow became the prized medium. Quirky twist? Snow harvesters were exclusively left-handed, a superstition claiming right hands scorched purity. Worse, elite snow cafes sprouted in Istanbul, serving shaved snow flavored with violets or opium to drowsy bureaucrats. Ancient Turkish snow cones with extra kick, you murmur, dodging a donkey laden with snow bricks. But the true evolution blooms in Mughal India. At Fatehpur Sikri, you descend into a Baradari-style ice pit, a marriage of Persian Yakshul and Indian stepwell. Giant stone ramps spiral down to a sunken chamber where ice blocks nestle in Himalayan salt beds. Badgers here wear jali screens, carving breezes into delicate filigrees of coolness. Persian bones, Indian skin, a builder smiles. Fringe alert. Legends claim Mughal pits stored eternal ice from sacred Mount Kailash ice that allegedly glowed blue and never melted. Emperor Jahangir's diary describes serving it to guests as Siva's tears. You squint at ordinary frost-clouded slabs. Looks like standard issue H2O to me. Debate flares over stolen genius. When British envoy Thomas Herbert sketched a yak shell in 1626, his notes called it a Mohammedan marvel. Yet by 1800, England's aristocracy built ice houses on every country estate lined with brick, topped with turf, storing Norwegian lake ice. Historians still argue whether Europe's design was independent innovation or intellectual theft via Ottoman traders. You tour one in Gloucestershire, dank, inefficient, leaking meltwater like a sobbing gargoyle. Rostam would have face-palmed, you mutter. Sensory shift. Back in Persia's Dashti Kavir desert, a different beast rises. Here, yakshuls grow needle-thin conical spires, not for beauty, but to pierce sandstorms. Builders mix sarouge with bitumen, creating blackened walls that radiate heat faster at night. Desert's too greedy for cold, a nomad explains, patting his camel's ice-wrapped water bag. We fight steel with steel, but the fringe follows trade routes. In Cairo's Mamluk era, Mummai's ice pits, workers layered Nile ice with hippo fat for insulation. Venetian merchants carried Persian ice preservation techniques to alpine communities, where snow churches stored ice under altars to keep Christ's wine cool, claimed a friar. You peek inside one. The ice bears chip marks from sacramental chisels. Holy sherbet, anyone? China's twist? Ming Dynasty, Beijing, blended Persian ventilation with ice harvested from frozen canals, stored in underground bamboo labyrinths. Eunuchs recorded melt rates using incense sticks. 1 stick per hour lost equaled heaven's displeasure. Quirky and dark, emperors executed ice keepers for excessive melt, accusing them of hiding winter's heart. As you stand atop a Safavid era yakshul near Isfahan, Rostam's voice echoes in memory. Asterisk mud and whip-beat sun. Asterisk, asterisk, but now new challengers emerge, coal-fired steam, rattling compressors, the promise of man-made cold. Below, a merchant loads the last ice blocks onto a train bound for Tehran. The yakshul's door creaks shut, perhaps for good. Tomorrow, we'll witness the fall of these frozen giants and their ghostly rebirth in modern tech. For now, though, let your fans' breeze mimic those yali carved winds, fragile, intricate, and fading like a desert mirage. The train whistle screams like a mechanical djinn as the last ice blocks from Rostam's yakshul rattle toward Tehran. It's 1935, and Persia is now Iran, a nation racing toward steel, steam, and the siren song of artificial cold. You stand beside the tracks, dust stinging your eyes, watching winter's ancient guardian surrender to progress. Mainstream fact: the death knell sounded with Tehran's first ice factory in 1893, a coal-belching beast that churned out perfect cubes day and night, untethered to seasons or sweat. Historians still argue whether yakshuls faded from obsolescence or cultural amnesia, but Rostam's grandson, Farzin, spits at the departing train. They sell winter in boxes now. No soul, just smoke. Walk through Yaz alleys today. Crumbling yakshul domes sag like exhausted giants, their badgers skeletal against satellite dishes. Pigeons nest where ice priests once listened for melt. In one vault, a carpet weaver stores wool. Still cool in summer, she laughs, but the true coup de grace? Electric refrigerators arriving in bazaars by the 1950s, humming promises of cold without cadence, quirky twist. Die-hard traditionalists insisted factory ice tasted of machinery and hired thieves to loot abandoned yakshials for pure ice. Sentimental piracy, watching a 70-year-old man chip frost from a forgotten vault. Also highly illegal. Yet the genius refused to die. Travel to modern-day Iran and spot the echoes. Badgers 2.0. University of Tehran engineers retrofit ancient wind catchers with solar-powered fans, creating hybrid cooling for libraries. Great-grandpa's and Eddie got an upgrade, a student grins. Saruj reborn. Nanotech labs study the mortar's microstructure, mimicking its air-trapping pores in eco-concrete. Turns out goat hair was genius, admits a chemist. We call it bioaggregate insulation now. Fancy. Ice farming's ghost in Arizona's deserts. Experimental radiative sky cooling panels mimic Yakshial principles, shedding heat into space at night to form ice without electricity. Persia called. You whisper to a solar engineer. They want their patent. Fringe resurrection. Meet Arash, a dreadlocked architect in Shiraz, building neo-yakshials for off-grid vegans. His design features hempcrete walls, sacred geometry vents, and a mandatory ice meditation room. Cold is spiritual, he insists, showing blueprints sprinkled with zodiac signs. Also, my kale stays crisp. Rostam's ghost face palms. Debate rages in academic journals. Why did some remote yakshials outlive their urban cousins by decades? Mainstream theory cites poverty and poor infrastructure. But fringe scholars point to Sistan province, where yakshials operated until 1990, fueled by Taliban-era trade embargoes and allegedly jinn appeasement rituals. A village elder winks. Machines break. Spirits listen. Feel the human cost. Visit Farzan's tiny ice shop. He still chips blocks from a dying mountain glacier, selling to old-timers who swear factory ice lacks character. His hands are maps of scars and frostbite. My grandfather stored seasons. He sighs. I sell souvenirs. A customer complains. This ice melts faster than my pension. Farzan's retort. So does your hair dye. Priorities. Global irony. While Iran abandoned yakshials, the West embraced their logic. London's 2022 chill factor. Skyscraper uses underground thermal labyrinths and wind-scooping facades straight from Isfahan's playbook. Passive cooling is punk rock now. Crows its Danish designer. Stick it to big energy. You whisper, tell that to the Mukani who dug Canets with a pickaxe. But the darkest legacy? Climate change. As Persian glaciers vanish, Farzan's ice source dwindles. Scientists now study yakshials as models for water security. Their seasonal hoarding could inspire modern reservoirs. We spent centuries defying the desert, says a hydrologist. Now the desert's winning. One last oddity. In 2017, a viral meme claimed drinking yakshial meltwater cured Wi-Fi allergies. Thousands stormed ruins with jugs. Idiots, Farzan mutters, selling them authentic ice at markup. But hey, capitalism's colder than any vault. As dusk paints the desert rust red, you touch a crumbling saruj wall. It's warm, no badgers left to breathe life into it. Yet in its silence, you hear whispers, convection currents, dripping meltwater, the ghostly chant of harvesters. The machines won, but the wisdom lingers. Tomorrow, we'll stand among these silent giants one last time. For now, though, let your fans hum, mimic that train whistle carrying winter away, but not forgotten. You stand under a moonlit desert sky, your palm resting against the crumbling saruj of Rostam's Yakshul. The structure breathes silence now, no clanging picks, no donkey brays, just the whisper of wind through skeletal badgers. Around you, the ruins stretch like fallen titans, domes gutted by time, cannot shafts choked with sand, ice chambers repurposed as sheep pens. This is the afterlife of Winter's Fortress. Mainstream fact. Over 100 documented Yakshul ruins still scar Iran's landscape, some dating back 2,400 years. The shadows stretch long in the moonlight, monuments to a war waged against thermodynamics with nothing but mud and lit. Historians still argue whether these husks deserve preservation as engineering marvels or romanticized relics of a cruel past. You kick a shard of sarouche? Try building IKEA furniture that lasts half as long. The desert night deepens, stars blazing like ice chips flown across velvet. In the stillness, the Yakshul's true triumph reveals itself, not in surviving, but in haunting. Modern cities unconsciously echo its genius subway tunnels, borrowing Connaught principles. Green roofs mimicking Saruj's thermal mass, even your fridge humming a distant cousin to the badger's convection song. Quirky resurrection. In Ya's back alleys, hipster cafes serve neo-sherbet in recycled plastic cups while playing recordings of Makani chants. Authentic sufferingness and more a barista winks. You sip rosewater slush. Tastes like cultural appropriation with extra mint. Fringe ghosts linger strongest. Nomads whisper that intact Yakshuls shelter Sarmozad frostbitten ghosts of laborers who patrol the vaults, weeping icy tears. Hear that? An old shepherd asks as wind whistles through a cracked dome. Cameron still counting buckets? You listen closely. Only the scuttle of a desert fox, or maybe indigestion. Yet Tech Brothers take it seriously. A 2023 app, Yakshul overlays spectral harvesters on ruins. Frostbite selfies. A tourist squeals, snapping pics with a shivering CG Rashid. Rostam's ghost likely facepalms from the afterlife. Debate rages in academia journals. Can ancient passive cooling save a climate crisis world? Revivalists point to India's Rajasthan, where modern Yakshul-inspired community cold rooms store vaccine doses off-grid. Critics sneer, nostalgia won't freeze a melting glacier. You trace a Saruj recipe carved on a fallen wall-goat hair, ash, stubbornness. The answer might lie in humility, not rebuilding domes, but stealing their secrets. Nanotech labs now mimic Saruj's air-trapping pores for carbon-neutral insulation. Turns out goat sweat was revolutionary, a scientist admits. Human echoes persist too. Farzan's grandson sells artisanal ice in Tehran's bazaars, machine-made cubes marketed as Yakshul Pure. Old men haggle anyway. This melts faster than my first marriage. He shrugs. So did Grandma Zara's patience. The joke. Modern problems require ancient solutions. A viral tweet claims storing your Wi-Fi router in a clay's ear boost signal. Tried it, you confess. Now my Netflix is buffering and smells of wet goat. But the deepest legacy is intangible. As you lean against the ruin, dawn bleeds gold over the dunes. The desert hasn't changed, it still breathes heat and hunger. Yet for centuries, in this very spot, humans wrestled winter into submission, not with brute force, but by listening to wind patterns, to water's whisper, to the crackle of freezing pools. Their victory wasn't defeating the sun, but outsmarting it season by season. A gecko darts over Rostam's fingerprint in clay still visible, still defiant. One last scholarly squabble, were Yakshil's ecological harmony or hubris? Purists call them sustainable marvels. Revisionist sites strict mountainsides for Sarouge ingredients. You scatter a handful of desert sand over the foundation. It swirls, settles, becomes part of the structure again. The answer, like cold, is fleeting. Word count 1098. Wind down. Now, as the last stars fade and the desert holds its breath, let the silence settle around you like a blanket woven from centuries of ingenuity and dust. Those towering ice houses, those quiet guardians of winter's last stand, have finally stilled their whispered secrets. Their stories now folded into the soft dunes and the patient stones. You needn't carry their weight any longer, not the frostbite of the harvesters, not the size of the Mukani in their tunnels, nor even Rostam's stubborn pride. Feel the coolness of this moment, seeping into your thoughts, gentle as the first badger breeze of evening, telling you that some triumphs endure not in brick and mortar, but in the quiet understanding that humans once danced with the impossible and, for a little while, held it by the hand. Breathe in, slow and deep, as the horizon blushes with the soft promise of morning, and imagine the Yakshul shadow stretching long and protective over your own rest. All those worries you carried here, the heat and haste and noise of the modern world, are no match for this ancient calm. They dissolve like ice chips on warm stone, leaving only peace in their wake. The desert keeps its vigil, the sand remembers every footprint, and somewhere, in the space between dreams, the wind still hums a Mukani's lullaby. Let your eyelids grow heavy as the last grains of consciousness slip away, cradled in the certainty that you, too, are part of this endless, quiet dance between darkness and light, warmth and chill, memory and sleep. Drift now, deeper, deeper still, wrapped in the softest shroud of stillness, while the world outside spins on without you. Rest well.